Parrish here to play 5 questions on the Tigers with CJ Hurt. CJ is in charge of the questions. I'm in charge of the answers. Let's get into it with question number 1.
How bad was that loss to Tulane this weekend?
Definitely not ideal. Quad 3 losses never are, and is just problematic on a variety of levels. A, because the Tigers led the game by double digits in the first half, up by 3 at one point in overtime. It was a home game they were supposed to win that at different points in regulation and overtime they had in their control, and yet just couldn't close the deal. Missed 10 of 26 free throws in the game, turned it over 22 times. Just a lot of bad stuff that is going to making the NCAA tournament harder than it looked like it was going to be a week ago. I think when we talked this time last week, the idea was no midweek games, but you're at home, big Lorenzen Wright ceremony inside FedEx Forum. You can, get a win over Tulane that maybe doesn't completely cancel out the loss in New Orleans, but at least gives you a season split with, let's be honest, a very mediocre AAC men's basketball program. And rather than that be the reality, the Tigers dropped to 0-2 against Tulane this season. This one, again, is a quadrant 3 loss, their first of the season. So it was problematic. Not necessarily the type of thing that's going to cost them a trip to the NCAA tournament, but it doesn't help things.
Any issues with Kendrick Davis's last shot there at the end in overtime?
It's a bad shot. Not necessarily a bad play, but definitely a bad shot. Kendrick has been a quality three-point shooter throughout his career, but he hasn't been good this season, and he was not good in that game. I didn't mind the action, though. As I watched it develop, it was very familiar to me, if only because, and you can go look this up, Kansas ran and does run some very similar stuff with their best player, Jalen Wilson. Now, Jalen Wilson is more of a wing, power forward type player as opposed to Kendrick Davis being a little lead guard. But the action is very similar. They ran it, I remember seeing it twice in the first meeting between Kansas and Kansas State, the one that was at Bramlage Coliseum. Kansas State won it. Fans stormed the court. Jerome Tang, the first-year coach, stood on the scores table, gave the speech. That deal. At the end of that game, 2 different times, Kansas did basically the same thing. They have Jalen Wilson start up here in the top corner, come around, get the ball. And the idea is not for him to stop and shoot. It is to have momentum, getting downhill, get to the rim, score, get fouled, maybe both. In that game against Kansas State, one time Jalen Wilson got to the rim as he's supposed to. The other time it got blown up. So it worked one time, didn't work the other time. But it was rock-solid action both times. It's just Kansas State blew it up one time and didn't the other. This one was designed the exact same way, to get Kendrick Davis the ball with some momentum, get downhill, get to the rim, score, get fouled, perhaps both. The problem here is it really starts with Jaden Hardaway, who was supposed to set some sort of screen there, and he just doesn't. And both defenders, Jaden takes off this way, both defenders stay with Kendrick Davis. So at that point, I can see where he sees he's in a little bit of trouble, because you can maybe turn the corner on them still, but then you've got the other 3 Tulane players. One's in the lane, the other 2 are in a position to help if they need to. Very crowded, and you've got Elijah McCadden standing in the corner down here unbothered. They're not even paying attention to him. Why? Because he's a 33% three-point shooter. They'll live with him over in that corner if that's what it takes to get Kendrick Davis to get the ball out of his hands or take a long three-pointer. So I understand why Kendrick did what he did. He looked up and he had 2 guys right in front of him and more guys waiting. But that's a low percentage shot for most people on the planet not named Steph Curry or Damian Lillard or somebody like that. I would have rather seen him try to get to the rim, no matter what that looks like, and see if the officials will really swallow their whistles or blow them and send you to the free throw line with a chance to win the game. As it is, he pulled. He's capable of making that shot, but based on his percentages both in that game and in this season, it was unlikely to go in.
So with that loss, how does the Memphis tournament resume look right now?
Worse than it looked last week, but still not terrible. The Tigers are 17-6 overall, 7-3 in the AAC, 2-2 in quadrant 1, 4-3 in quadrant 2. So 6-5 in the first 2 quadrants. That's fine. But when you put a quadrant 3 loss like this on top of it, it dings it up. The quad 3 games, most teams at the Memphis level of the sport don't play many quad fours. You get some, but not many. But you get a lot of quad threes in the AAC, and those are really, with the exception of the quad fours, the worst. And the reason they're the worst is because if you win them, they don't really help you, but if you lose them, they can really hurt you. And this is one of those that Memphis needed to win, not because if you beat Tulane, you're going to lead Inside College Basketball or Sports Center, or even have people who casually follow the sport notice it all. But if you lose it, it's going to send you down the seed chart in a pretty significant way, or at least get you closer to the bubble, perhaps on the wrong side of the bubble, depending on the bracketologist you're listening to, than you want to be. For what it's worth, Jerry Palm, my colleague at CBS Sports, updated his bracket this morning. He still has Memphis in it. He still has Memphis as a top 9 seed. So what happened. They're still in position to make the NCAA tournament. But obviously, you don't want to take too many more of these quad 3 losses, because if you do, things get that much more uncomfortable.
How much are injuries to blame right now, as we get to question 4 for the Tigers being in this predicament?
I imagine it plays some role, if only because, they are operating without Malcolm Dandridge and Alex Lomax. Alex hasn't played since January 11th. Malcolm hasn't played since December 13th. They are role players, but they are 2 of the top 6 scorers on this team. Even right now, you go look at the season statistics, Alex and Malcolm are 2 of the top 6 scorers. Now, if you want to argue Alex Lomax and Malcolm Dandridge should never be starting for a program of Memphis's caliber, should never be that important to a program of Memphis's caliber, I agree with you. But that speaks to the talent that is not on this roster this season. Those guys were important to this team. They've combined to start 18 games. And so when you lose 2 of your top 6 midseason for a significant chunk of time, that's gonna matter to you. I'd like to think that Memphis, and this deep into the Penny Hardaway tenure, losing players the caliber of Malcolm Dandridge and Alex Lomax wouldn't matter much. But again, those are 2 of the top 6 scorers on this team, and playing without them, it has its disadvantages. It's a role. I don't think it's an excuse to not make the NCAA tournament, but it is an explanation for why things are a little harder than maybe they should be.
So what's on tap?
2 quadrant 3 games this week at USF on Wednesday, at home against Temple on Sunday, and really need to win both. I've talked about this really for years now. Because for years now we've been in this position with Memphis, as the calendar flips from January to February and March is approaching, where Memphis needs to win these games or not lose these games to make the NCAA tournament. People look at the Houston games as these big, massive games, because they are. They're going to be nationally televised games against one of the best teams in the country, a team that, based on today's projections, would be a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. But I don't think Memphis has got to beat Houston to make the NCAA tournament. What Memphis has got to do to make the NCAA tournament is not lose more quad 3 games, or not lose too many quad 3 games. And both of these games are quad 3 games. And what's interesting is that, if you look at Memphis's schedule going forward, right now it's 2 quad 2s. It's 2 quad 1s, 3 quad 2s, and 3 quad 3s. That's the rest of the season. But UCF and Cincinnati are both in the 70s of the net. UCF is 70, Cincinnati's 73rd. If they slip outside the top 75, those become quadrant 3 games too. So this is really tough situation that the Tigers find themselves in. They're still in a good spot to make the NCAA tournament, but boy, they cannot afford to take too many more quad 3 losses, and that's why they need to go 2-0 this upcoming week.